All right, welcome. It's good to see some familiar faces. Is anybody first time ever here at this shop? All right, well, welcome. So, thanks for coming. Been looking forward to this. And like Elliot said, this is what I'm going to talk about today is something that I'm in the middle of actually. And what we're going to do today is figure out how to put some arms on an existing side chair. I had made this side chair like, I don't know, 6 years ago. Actually, you may have seen it on Classic Woodworking. But I was trying to include a chair in one of those 25-minute episodes. And the challenge with that is how do you get it done in 25 minutes, right? How do you show all the methods and techniques and whatnot? And we had to skip over a little bit, but I simplified some chairs that I had made previously that had a lot of curves to them, you know? So this is the chair that we ended up with, if you haven't seen it, and it's a classic like mortise and tenon chair. It's got all the bones the same way a Chippendale chair or a Queen Anne chair were constructed. So it's got all that kind of approach to it is the same. So I think of this as a really great first chair if you want to dive into the world of mortise and tenon chair making before maybe tackling a Queen Anne or a more complex Chippendale chair. But it turned out to be, I tried to simplify it or dumb it down, but it actually became pretty popular with people. And I was like, really, that's a very simple version, but it is a craftsman style design. So craftsman style is, if you're not familiar, is very kind of linear. It's meant to be more about the integrity of the materials and joinery, and oftentimes the joinery is exposed, like you'll see through tenons, which I did not incorporate in this piece, but it's real honest tenons and pegged and more about the materials being strong. So it was most common to see white oak and the rift sawn material on these pieces. So this is a prime example of a craftsman style. So it's very linear. You see the splat is linear here. The only, this part, this back leg, I borrowed this shape from like a Chippendale chair. So this could be used as the kind of foundation of a Chippendale style chair as well. So we've got that linear shape and nothing really fancy about the front legs. They're just straight kind of legs. There's no curvature to them. We have these rails, just for terminology for chairs. We have the seat rails and the stretchers. Okay, the stretchers add a level of strength to this joint. You can imagine, I don't know if when you were a kid, you weren't allowed to lean back in the chairs. I wasn't either. And so I've been trying to build chairs that I could lean back in and not worry about it. And so when you have that stretcher, it adds quite a bit of strength. Surprisingly, when you add an arm, you're actually strengthening this joint as well because you're adding another feature above. It's like an above stretcher in a way, depending how you connect it. So then we've also got the front seat rail and then the front legs, as I mentioned. Now the back, you have this top horizontal rail, which is called the crest rail. That's easy enough to remember. It's at the crest of the chair. And this back rest, this is where it starts to get weird. It's not a backrest, it's a splat. Okay, splat. So I'm not sure why. Maybe someone on a hot day without their shirt on, lean back, and that was the sound. But we've got also at the bottom where the splat anchors into is the shoe rail. So I'm not sure why it was called the shoe, but this is a pretty important piece because it kind of anchors that splat and things come together. And then we have the lower rear stretcher and of course the back legs or the back posts. Okay. So that's the task. We got to take this to the next level. I meant to mention, let me just stop for a second on this. You guys, it's because of the guild that I have a tool cabinet hanging here. Did you know that? Bob, I think, was instrumental in getting me to do this. And it was from back in, I see familiar faces from then. And some of you guys, I'm just reminiscing as I'm looking around. It's like coming back to my memory. Gave me this low angle plane. Do you remember that day? You guys came by? That was so nice. It was, so this was from the beginner intermediate group from 2009 to 2012. Wow. So that time flies. But we made this cabinet, and I have since made a smaller version of it. If you want a cabinet like that, we've got a course for it now too. So, and then there's a chest of drawers over there under that blanket that we made that has never left the shop. It's still here. So I got issues, but anyway, so back to our chair. This is we made a course to this. You know, it actually was in Fine Woodworking magazine of all places after the classic woodworking. And this is all it ever was. And we have a course that talked about the dining chair. And one of the nice things about teaching is you get these really, routinely, we get these letters and emails from people with pictures of the things they've made. And you see these chairs around their dining table. And more, we started to get, every now and then I get someone say, do you have an armchair version? It's like, I never did the armchair. No, we didn't. It seemed like enough to do the side chair. So it finally dawned on me that let's do the armchair and let's add it as a bonus content for that course. So that side chair is now going to be an armchair. And I am right in the middle, actually 2/3 the way through that course on the armchair. So Tuesday night we wrap it up. So, what are the obstacles to putting an arm on a chair like this? Well, you gotta come up with a design, right? You gotta conceptualize, what am I gonna do? What would be appropriate to go on this chair? Well, first of all, when adding arms to a side chair, you don't just put them right on a side chair. The side chair usually is a slimmer, more shallow chair than the arm. You ever notice that? Your armchairs are more kingly, right? But your armchairs also have to be wider, because once you set those arms on there,
you can't sit in there.
right? Is that a problem? Doesn't look like it's a problem for you. But it could happen, right? And it would be a little embarrassing if you had limitations to your seating like that. But this is pretty standard. When I made this chair, I tried to take like what was probably the most common dimensions for a side chair. So it's only 20 inches across the front, and then it's 16 across the back, and it's 16 inches deep from the back, the side rail to the front rail, right? What's that? Okay, so we're 16 inches deep, 20 inches wide, and 16 wide at the back. So we have, we're coming in 2 inches on each side, right? And that's just not enough. So typically, when I was working with Pugmore, as a lot of you may have heard about, when I apprenticed down in North Carolina, and when we made armchairs, he would always add 1.75 inches to the width. I'm not sure why it was 1.75 inches, why it wasn't 1.5 inches, but I'm sure it was because he had measured antiques. They also sold antiques, and they had really nice fine ones coming through there in the 40s and 50s, like period furniture they were selling and getting great patterns off of. So I trusted him in that and pretty much everything else too. So 1.75 inches we add to the width, and we're going to add 1 inch to the depth. So in order to do that, we need to make a few little changes here before we can start adding arms to this chair. So to add to the width, everything that's going horizontally, we've got to stretch, right? So we've got to stretch the crest rail, the shoe, and the rear stretcher, and the front rail 1.75 inches. The front rail's easy, right? It's just whatever it is with the tenons, we're just going to add to those measurements. And the rear stretcher is the same too. And by the way, when making this chair, you can see from the back, you've got parallel legs. That was one of the simplifying approaches to making this chair in 25 minutes. And because a lot of the Chippendale chairs actually flare. So you've got an angle to your shoe, and the lower stretcher is shorter. And then you come up, and these back legs actually tenon into the crest rail, which usually extends beyond, right? So you have this flaring kind of wider look, but a narrower seat here. This is simplified. All these shoulder to shoulder to shoulder are all the same. So you're just gonna, whenever I cut my back pieces, I just set the stop, and I would just set it 1.75 inches longer, right? For the armchair. But once we do that, we've got to change this angle a little bit of the curve. So that curve ended up being a little more subtle. What's up? So we're gonna soften this curve a little bit, and we have to change the facets just a little down here. The nice thing about making an armchair version, even in the Chippendale and Queen Anne period, is the splat doesn't change. You don't make it wider for that. There's no reason to, and it doesn't matter. You'll see in a minute. So in making this, I actually just have these elongated pieces right here for you to see. This is a crash course in making an armchair. So this actually has the joinery in the same relative position off of the front of the block. So we're starting with a block, we're laying out our joinery, cutting our joinery, and then we saw our curves, right? Make everything simple that way, right? We're always trying to reference off of square surfaces when we're making complicated curves, as many of you have experienced already. But so to save this, to make all the joinery the same, this curve is going to be just a little flatter, but longer, which it is. And then the shoe rail is going to simply have a little longer facet here, because now it's got instead of coming down, it's going 7/8 longer on each side. So it's just a little flatter adjustment. And then this curve, I just flattened out a little, which happened to turn out to be using the same curve as the crest rail. So you can multiply. Usually there was some lift or cutaway on the shoe in the back because it's a pretty thick, heavy piece looking back there. So it would be lightened up a little bit. And this was an opportunity as well to add a kind of relationship to the different design elements of this chair. This chair could have been made with very straight lines, and but it seemed like rather than, we've got this flat, straight splat, but we added the curve to the crest rail, and then we have this curve to the back leg, and then we have this subtle curve to the underside of the shoe. And that's pretty much it, right? So you have, as a composition, you've just got that little interplay between subtle curves here and there, and then very linear, even down to the little boxy cutout ways in the back splat. So,
Question.
yeah.
Tom, when you changed the curve to the crest rail, did you use a mathematical computation for that, or did you do it some other way?
I use a stick. That's the mathematical. Yeah, no, I didn't. Sometimes when it's really critical, like if you're laminating something, you need to really know what it is. I'll swing an arc or even put a router on like a Dremel and just route the exact radius, right? And you could, sometimes you can actually figure that out as a radius, but I just usually take something like this and bend it, and you get,
And just clamp it and...
yeah, or hold it and then do the stick in the, with the pencil trick, yeah. Or get your apprentice to do that.
How do you determine how much to bend it?
Well, I just make those little indicator points. So I know my point has to be the same. I know how far back from the front surface I need to go.
So you maintain that same distance from the cord to the, I can't remember what it's called,
Yeah,
the arc, correct?
yeah. That's the thing that's what I was trying to say, was that when you stretch this crest rail, you want to keep the depth of your curve in the same relationship to your splat. So you don't have to move your joinery when you're cutting all that, just try to simplify it a little for yourself. So in the end, I won't assemble a whole chair. We have an armchair that gets assembled from the inside out. So this is a little different than like a Chippendale chair, because with this Craftsman design, the legs come all the way up. So our crest rail tenons into the legs rather than the legs tenon into the crest rail. So we've got that going for us there. So in order to assemble this, we start from the splat pieces go into the shoe and the crest rail, and then the legs come in this way. If it were a Chippendale chair, you actually glue up the base, and then the splat and the crest rail comes down like this after. Yeah, I'll show that in a second. Yeah, I will show that. So here's just the quick example. This is an armchair version. All the joinery is the same. And so I'd just be gluing all this in, and then our crest rail. Try not to do this backwards. It's not as comfortable when the crest rail curve goes the other way. It has been, yeah, there we go. Okay, so that would be glued up and clamped. And when I was clamping that, I'd actually dry fit it into the legs to keep those tenons aligned correctly rather than over torquing them. But if the joinery is done well, you should have everything should come together nicely. But then we would clamp side to side, and we essentially would have our armchair. So let me set this aside. Yeah, they are. That was one of the simplifying features of this chair, was that the three back pieces are all cut to the same length, so they're all square. And I've got our armchair version right here.
That's bad. That's so fast.
Ta-da! Yeah, it takes a few minutes. Thanks. Take this one out of the oven, right? So there it is. I mean, it looks pretty much like the same chair, but you can see the width, can't you? Like it's not quite as felt, like it's got not quite as thin, but it's allowing us now a little more room in the back, When you have arms, you don't want them right in here. You want them out here, you know. So we want to get these arms on here in a way that looks like a nice composition, like it looks like it belongs here and gives a good comfort there.
You didn't thicken the legs. They're same dimensions.
Yep, exactly. Like everything is the same dimensionally. Like you don't have to change the legs at all. In fact, let me just grab that chair so you can see how similar side by side they are. Yeah, you really don't, but it is more substantial, right? So when you get those arms on there, it'll have a much more, you know, solid appearance and just it's more of a special seat, you know, once you get the arms on there. You know, when I was building furniture for a living, I guess I still do, but I try to pass it on as much as possible. You know, chairs were hard to make a living on because unless you're doing the multiples, they can be very good if you do them in production because you can produce all the parts and pieces and all that. But because of the complexity in the angles and figuring it all out, and usually there's a lot of shaping, it's harder to recognize the amount of time that goes into a chair. So I always try to tell people, don't get discouraged because building a set of chairs is a little like a marathon. You know, it's more psychologically challenging, I think, than any other project we make. Because like when you're building a chest of drawers, you got a box sitting in front of you usually pretty fast, right? And you go, I got that box. Now, you know, you can fit your dividers or whatever, however you approach it. But with chairs, so much of the work is done in the little parts. And then you got all these parts over here and you're like, man, I've been doing this for several weeks, and I got nothing to show for it, especially if you're doing ball and claw and all that, you know. It's like, and then there's that one day you start to glue it up, you know. Some of you know this feeling from chair making. And instead of having like 70 pieces sitting there, you have like 6, you know, and your chairs are sitting there. So if you have chair parts at home, let this be an encouragement to you. You probably have done a lot more than you think, and it's closer than you think to realizing the finish line. But when people would say, you know, the price chairs was challenging because they represented a lot of work, you know. And if you have a week in a chair, just your time, right? Like Queen Anne chairs were a solid week at least, you know. And say you're billing out back in the 90s, we would try to bill out at $50 an hour, right? That's $2,000. You haven't counted the wood yet or the upholstery, right? So who's going to spend $20,000 on a set of 8 chairs, you know? But it's worth, to me, I'm like, hey, those are really something. I mean, when you have a handmade chair, it's really unique and special, right? But you can see why it's hard to sell them and why production is better. But then when they say, could I have an armchair? How much are you going to add price-wise for that arm? Those arms, how long those are going to take? Yeah, you really, it takes you, I time myself, you know, because I was always optimistic about how long things were going to take. Oh, I'm going to throw these arms on there in no time. But it always took me a solid 2.5 days. And that was pushing, maybe working long days, right? So now you're adding, just for the labor there, you're adding $1,200, $1,000, $1,200.
You're saying 2 days, but how many hours in that 2 days?
No, that's what I mean. They were stretching it. Yeah, that was pushing it. I mean, so there is economy and scale. If you're really cranking them out, then you can make them for a lot less money. But the way we're making them, they're not produced. Everything is thoughtfully joined and thoughtfully laid out. It's not like, how we think and care about the grain direction and it's a whole different animal when you make a custom piece. So there's a lot of value there. I often tell people, say, hey, I want to be a furniture maker. And I go, okay. It's, and I get that feeling. There is that romance of it, and it's undeniable, and it never really goes away in a way. But you gotta be smart about how you make things. And if you're gonna make chairs, you have to be either the most expensive person in the room or make them in production in some way. It's hard to be in that middle zone, or focus on tables. Tables give people the perception of great value. It's like this long expanse, but they're just a bunch of flat boards on the top, right? And then even if you have a complex base and it looks big, you can make a lot better profit if you just become the table person, right? So there was a time I was almost going to be Canterbury Tables. Lame, right? But I decided I couldn't do it, so we were doing all chairs. So anyway, now we got to put arms on this chair, and we want to do it in such a way that it feels right, that it's not only comfortable, it looks good, but it looks like it belongs to this, right? So what kind of elements are we going to choose? What would you choose for a chair like this? Just
maintain the craftsman style.
Yeah.
Kind of boxy and square.
Yeah, you start out, you're thinking, okay, it's got to be kind of linear, right? So, but then you don't want it to just look like sticks sticking there either, right? So I struggled with this at first, and we're going to go into a quick little sketching development. But before we start thinking about the appropriate arms for here, it's nice to dip into the history and get some reference on some historical pieces and how did they think about designing arms for chairs they already had. So let me just bring up this Chippendale chair. And this one you guys have seen. This is a chair that I love this chair because you can see the brand back here. It's P.A. Moore. That was Pug Moore's stamp, his burn-in stamp. And this chair sat next to the wood stove in the shop the whole time I was there, from like 1990 through 1993. Late 1990 into 93, so 3 years there. And it had been there a while before that, right? And I always liked the look of it. It has this nice piercing here. I forget if that's Philadelphia or Connecticut, but does anyone any of you historians? But it doesn't matter. But this type of, the style of the piercing of the splat on these Chippendale chairs was regional. They tended to have the same general style. So you would see this type of thing in, I believe this is Philadelphia or Connecticut. No, I don't want to commit, but it doesn't matter. It was an appealing look to me, and I loved the way the curves flowed, had this nice, not overly detailed shell on here, and then the ears of the crest rail on a Chippendale piece, had that nice rolled lobe back there as well. And you can see on this chair how the back leg tenons up into the crest rail, as I was saying, and how this one's a little more complicated because there's an angle to the shoe, makes the lower stretcher shorter, but with the same angle. And then the top is tenoning in, so you've got an angle at the top of the legs. It's a little more to it, right? But we're going to include this type of chair in our courses in the future. But
So Tom, I was just wondering, how do they usually cut the piercing and back of back rail like that? How do they usually use a scroll saw, or they do it by hand?
Well, they meaning way back then or now?
Well, now they probably use a scroll saw.
Yeah. That's how I always did it with a scroll saw, just make it that much easier. And just as a little detail to this, when cutting piercings like this, I just assumed it was just a 90-degree cut, but it's usually back cut. So typically it was like 7 degrees. And what it does is by back cutting, everything is back cut like that. It just gives a more crisp appearance to the piercing, and when you see it at an angle, it doesn't look so thick. But if you look at the back, it's narrower details slightly because of that. But that's how we do it, is set the angle on the scroll saw and saw everything out like that. Yeah. So no such thing on our Craftsman chair. We're just going, everything's 90 degrees like the Craftsman style would be, right? So here we've got this is a little larger version. This one needed arms. And I always wondered when I was at Pugs, like, I wonder if those arms are around here somewhere, because they weren't in the main shop. And then he had a storage room with a whole bunch of stuff. And when he was closing things down and moving out, I rummaged through and found in a box these arms with glue still dripping from the joint, right? I mean, they had history. So they've been all rough. They've been all joined and roughed out, and they just need finishing. And look how this works. See how that shape relates to the crest rail. So it wasn't unusual for Chippendale arms to have that relationship, that same curve here. Sometimes you would see the detail on the ears repeated on the arm roll over here. Sometimes you'll see these Chippendale chairs, they will almost always have this kind of OG-S curve, but you might just be flatter without the carving. You could see that on a chair like this. So then when they come on in, let me just get a quick clamp here. I'll just hold this one over here. So now you can see how it looks with them on. And if these were all nicely set in and glued in and scribed and fit back here, you would just look at it and say, wow, those look great. They look like they belong there, right? But yeah, you have this little outward curve, which is a good idea. So, and then from the profile, you have this arm post or arm support coming up, tenoning nicely in. And these are beautifully sculpted and dished out on the inside. I saw that recently with Sam Malouf rockers. Some of you made those. You have that heavy dishing for that. Your arm kind of sits at an angle like that usually. So beautiful chair, fun to build, but you can see how making these arms in themselves is a sculptural adventure, right? You've got to lay out the joinery and then do all your pre-sawing. That's tenoned, a true mortise and tenon, glued up and then fitted and scribed and notched and glued. And, by the time you get that in, you can see why it takes 2.5, 3 days to make these, yeah.
So how is that attached to the leg?
Typically they lap over the side rail and then they're fitted back into the back and scribed and shaped. And sometimes I've seen them where they were just flat against there. And most commonly you'll have a plugged screw that runs and pulls it in, like it'll be coming in from this angle. So it pulls it into the corner from the back. So you can have glue and then a screw pulling it in. The nice thing about this is that the forces, because it's kind of wedged like this, it really doesn't want to get pushed down. Like if you just held it there, you see the angle of the back leg is angled this way. So to push it down, once you've got it anchored here, it really, it's kind of trapped in there anyway. So it's not subjected to a ton of force, but I still,
Put your hands on
right here.
out there, okay.
Yeah. And then one of the nice things though that I like to add to these, and these are made to go on flush, but you can let it in a little or house it, right? So you add a lot of strength, even if it's only a 1/16 of an inch deep. You're giving yourself also a little more grace for fitting it on the leg. So it might not have the perfect fit. But if you want to fit it like this, you've got to scribe it and get it right. Yeah.
Did Pub or Utah ever try doweling them in as opposed to using a screw?
No, there's actually, you could, but it's harder to fit the dowel. It's complicated because you need to you want to anchor it to the rail. The whole fitting process, it's giving you flexibility by being able to run in the screw. But the screw, I think they're underrated in some cases. Like, we don't like to put screws in the work, right? We want everything with real wooden joinery. But that mechanical pull, you're getting some real strength out of a screw if you're not compromising the strength of the element itself. Like sometimes when you could split a piece of wood because you're running the screw or you didn't pre-drill it or whatever. But they were good enough for Sam Maloof. They're good enough for me. I mean, he used to screw stuff together and you're like, what? I mean, he had that nice seat joint, but the crest rail was basically flat and 3 screws. And then he plugged it with ebony. You're like, oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful. And it was more than adequate. I mean, it's not coming apart. There were no big stresses on it, but it acts as a clamp. It pulls it in. You've got glue. If you housed it, it's a super strong joint. And then in the front, we anchored by countersinking and running 2 or 3. I like to put like 3 screws into the base there and glue it on first. So, man, you've got like, every time I put arms on, I go, wow, those are there, right? You feel good about the integrity of them. So, so that's a Chippendale chair. Let's look at one other example. This is a Queen Anne version, right? So this is kind of one that was at Winterthur had this chair. But this is the side chair, a nice kind of honest Queen Anne chair, rounded back legs there. And this is the same chair, but the armchair version. So there, we've got that width and depth ready for arms. This has no shellac on it or anything. Unlike that one, it's kind of embarrassing that this has been, the reason it's all beat up is and dog chewed. I'm not kidding you. I had a like golden retriever left its mark there. God rest her soul. But this has been unfinished in the house waiting for arms, right? So sort of like Pug's chair has been used a lot in the house and it's no longer in the house, but this is a classic. Another question. If you were tasked with designing and attaching arms to a chair like this, you're probably not going to put that on there, although that doesn't look too bad, right? But you're going to want something that has the same sculptural flowing curves as are on this chair. And these are the arms. These have not been rounded, but these are the arms for this chair that, similar to Pug's situation, I've got the arms, I've got the chair. I just got to have the determination. I got a lot of projects like that, but anyway, this is a little different. It's got like an angled joint here, but there is a tenon in there, nicely glued up. And then there's a lot of sculptural shaping to it. And when it goes on, it's going to go on and be something like this. This is very rough, but
that get notched out there on the top of the chair so it fits that round
Here?
area? Rounded.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I would have the negative of that round over there. And then I'll just hold this one over here. But that would be scribed and fitted back in there. And so now you can see how that looks appropriate, right? You have the similar curves here. You've got all that kind of relationship. And when these are rounded over, I swear, like, it feels like it is double the value of the chair. And it really almost is, right? By the time you do all that work. So this is the one. These took me 2.5 to 3 days to put two arms on. Why? Wow, I thought I was. No.
It doesn't make with that back leg.
Oh, no, that's part of it. Yeah. No.
And so how do you do that?
Yeah, you scribe it and you cut it away.
File.
File it. Yeah, you first, it's like anything like this. You start with chisels where you can or gouges. And then when you get down to the finer work, you're going to be a rasp, and then a fine file, and then just trial and error until it fits in there. But that's where having it sit over that rail, you can adjust that flat if you need it to curve in or out on the flat here. There's a lot of
I
things.
didn't know if you was gonna like, the part that fits into the seat, if you would just like notch that rounded part where you keep it square, or you actually round out that. It seems like a lot of work to have to make a little rounded.
Oh, it's not bad, actually. No, did I do it on this one? No, I hadn't done it yet. But no, if you just take a gouge with that kind of profile and you make a guideline up here, and you're just going to come across until you fit it on there. The nice thing about it not being notched is when you're fitting, if you can slide it back and forth a little bit while you're fitting back here, it gives you that flexibility for the fit. So you're kind of keeping your options open until everything works, and then it gets glued and screwed down and it's there for good, right?
Those arms are 2 or 3 pieces.
2. Yeah, so there's just this, you can see kind of right there's the joint. So this is one, and then this is the other. So, all right, I'm going to set this aside. So now we've got that nice little historical reference back to this. And this is kind of, I find this almost more challenging because it seems to want a very straight arm. And you're like, if I just put a straight arm on there, that's not going to look great. Well, we're not going to just start building stuff and throw it on here. We're going to start out by sketching. We'll make some simple sketches. And because we're going to design it and then we're going to build it. We don't have much time, so let's get on with it. All right, I'll give you the crash course. So when sketching, usually I'm just making very little small representations here. This was not here to start with. Okay, so I'm making these little sketches over here, and I'm just looking at relationships. So here's my arm post. I thought, and rather than having a straight line, let's have a little curved line. Well, that didn't do much. What if we had a different type of curve? Well, what I ended up doing was starting with just a straight line. So this is actually a scale model of our profile of our chair. So where we want to begin most commonly is the profile view. So here, the average, a good height for an arm is right around 9 to 10 inches high, but quite often they're dished out. So you could start at 10 and it would be okay. Yeah, from the top of the seat rail. Yep, above the rail. And so this one, I'm going to just lay it out to be 9.5 inches to the top. And I'll start with just a straight arm, right? Let's just see what that looks like, because maybe that's the answer. Okay, so this is in perspective 9.5 from, well, let's just do it here. From here to here. Okay, now we're thinking, all right, let's start out with just straight like that. And let's think about what kind of arm support we're going to put here. When making this, usually chair designers are working with the whole chair at the beginning, right? So if they're making an armchair, they'd be sketching the whole chair. Here we've already got the chair. We got to come up with the arms, right? So we're going to we made our scale model. This is 1/8 of an inch to an inch. Okay. So if we have a 2.5 inch wide piece, that's going to be 5/16 on the paper, right? But what I did was I made a little model right here, a little profile. I made this first, okay? And I just drew this on a board. I'm not going to go through the process to reproduce this. This is our back leg pattern to this chair. So this Craftsman chair, that's the leg that is all detailed with the mortises and locations and everything that is on the plan for building that exact chair. So in order to work and make a smaller representation, I needed to scale this. So all I did was take these key measurements and just transcribed it to 1/8 of an inch for every inch. Okay, I won't go through that whole process here, but I just ended up drawing it on a piece of plywood. There it is, right? So that's the same leg at 1/8 inch scale. And I drew it on a piece of plywood and then I sawed it out. Now I could get this on the paper and I just traced it out and I was able to make a 2-scale diagram, okay? So once you've gone from your little sketches to whatever your thoughts are, you're very free with that, right? Thinking, okay, how's this going to relate? Then you get a concept you want to push into actual scale. Then you're going to make your scale drawing, okay? Once you get happy with your scale drawing, then you can make a model from that. You can make a little miniature model. And we've done that a number of times on courses. And it's a real benefit because you can see that thing in 3 dimensions as in perspective. So it's very small. You know how it is. It's like if you get your head very close to it, it feels like actual size, right? Anyway, it worked out. So it really is helpful. Now, you're doing things on a very small scale, and it's so much easier to handle things small. So I could basically build this whole chair or a table or this bench in just a few hours by using the exact scale dimensions here and just hot gluing it together. And I can have something to look at and go, oh, that looks good. Rather than building the whole thing, you know, and taking a shot and then standing back and going, oh man, I wish I didn't do that. You know, and then you've spent all that money on the wood, or maybe. So usually when the process to working this out, and it might seem like wasted time, but this is the little subtleties of, it's like anything done well. It goes through revisions, right? The hardest part of writing is editing, right? The hardest part of writing anything is taking stuff away, or, you know, you need to mull it over. It takes time. So often I'll be doing something and I'll get like a little scale drawing or a mock-up, and I just have to leave and come back the next day. And then you look at it and you go, oh, it's like you were like percolating on that thing, right? And they go, no, I want to try this. And so you can do all this at a small scale. I had some photos for the Epic Weekend guys of some of the great designers in history. One of them, Hans Wagner, who designed more, he's considered the king of chair making, a Danish designer in the mid 20th century. And there's some famous pictures of him sitting at his desk, and he's got all these little models or maquettes of his designs over the years. And they're all kinds of cool, funky designs. And he built more like that, like a kid, right, playing. But he got it so down, and then he'd make his real accurate measured drawings and give them to the guys who had the production shops. And he designed like probably thousands of chairs. He had over 400 of his chairs went to production. You know, just think of just trying to get one. But some became very famous. But they work at this kind of scale. So you can save yourself a lot of time and go through the revisions and the editing process a lot easier scaled down like this. So that's what I did here. And then I was trying to think of, all right, let's just assume we're going to go with a straight arm to start with at 9.5 inches height over this. What kind of arm support am I going to have? So I just used that same little mock-up leg there and just drew in, and I left this empty space, and I tried 3 different styles, okay? So I thought, oh, I'll make one go forward. I tried this at first, like with a straight line and, with a tapering kind of line like that, maybe. So it was leaning forward. And then I have this one out here where you sometimes will see this, where the front leg actually continues all the way up and tenons into the underside of the arm, which isn't bad. But it does give you kind of this long high chair look, right? A little boxy. And then this one in the middle where you have the arm post sweeping back a little more rather than forward. So there's probably other versions you could go with here, but I felt like, I made my choice, but which one do you guys like? Yeah, middle one, yeah. So I kind of led you into that, didn't I? So you go, this one, or this one. All right, so what?
The arm can be short.
Yeah, it doesn't have to stick way out there. And so I put it out here, and it seems it's a little longer than these period piece arms, but I thought, hey, we can have it longer. Let's try it out. And once I got a visual on this, then I could start thinking about full size. But here, I was trying to decide how much curvature can I add to this with it still feeling like it belongs on a linear Craftsman chair, right? So I have my little drawing here, and I actually just flipped this and used this soft curve back in here to get the inside of this curve right here. Okay, then I made a sweeping curve. And when drawing to scale now, I'm just eyeballing it at first, trying to figure how wide should this be. And down here, I kind of borrowed from information I had on my period pieces. This is 2 1/4 across here. Okay, and then how wide should this be? It ended up being about, what was it, 1.25 inches. But you're sort of looking at the back leg. I didn't want it as big as the back leg, but that looked pretty good.
Why not?
Just, it felt a little chunky, out in space there. It's just, but that was from looking at it a while, right? Then you can see a little tiny detail here. I thought, I was thinking more about the joinery. What if we come through the arm with a through tenon? So we really have an opportunity there. And then we make a little pyramid detail, which you would see on some Morris chairs and whatnot. And we already have a pyramid detail at the top of our chair. So now we're going to get a kind of an interesting relationship. And we've got the curve here. We'll have that curve there. And things were starting to come together, right? So when you start to feel like you got something, you can make the model, and that will save you time. And when you feel reassurance from the model, you could make a full-size mock-up. So that's pretty common too. Just using poplar or pine or something. And often I just make butt joints and screw them together. So you're making that full-size model to get the actual three-dimensional, but then you also have the benefit, if you put it together well enough, to sit in it and see if it's comfortable. That's one of the great challenges of chairs, is that they're the only piece of furniture actually that asks you to trust them, right? That we actually sit into, right? You lay down in a bed, but that's just basically a post with a mattress on it. But a chair has to conform to the human form in a way that it's comfortable and it just feels right. And so they're challenging on a number of levels for how they look and how they feel. So once we've got that decided, we can then go to our full-size drawing. So I'm going to just go with this. We're not going to do the mock-up. Well, actually, we are doing a mock-up. I'm going to show you a mock-up of an arm, something like this. Oh, good question. Yeah, I'll show you that on the main drawing. But yeah, we could work that out too. Here, we could look at the plan or the top view of the arm, because again, we want to probably curve it out here, right? If we go just straight, we're going to be kind of narrow here. So we're trying to get a little outward. But there again, how much curve can we add to this chair with it feeling appropriate, right? So let's come back here just to the one more thing before we move to the. So this is the profile of our arm. I actually made this chair. I made a mock-up straight like this, and I'll give it away that it kind of felt too rigid and stiff there. And it felt like it would be okay if we had a little curve. And that's what some of these sketches were here, these low ones, where I was making, see that little curve? See how small I'm drawing here? I just draw that way, but some people draw larger, but it's easier because you're just visualizing, you're just looking for concepts and relationships, like it's not hugely detailed, but then you find something that kind of works. So I started thinking that, maybe a little bit of a curve like that on top of the arm would have a pleasing look. And I've done that I actually made the Craftsman Style rocking chair course. I don't know if any of you made that, and you see this on older period Craftsman pieces where they'll just curve the arm going back. So you have a flat, and it just is so much nicer. So I thought, okay, let's do that. Let's take this out of the flat plane. So I needed to start with something thicker so that we could take that, instead of an inch or an inch and a quarter thick arm, it needed to start thicker like this. Use my drawing board. This was a Shop Night Live episode, believe it or not. Goes back a ways. So if I start with this type of parameter where I start with a block, if I start heavier like that, then maybe I can get my joinery and then saw it away so that the underside is going to curve like this. And the top will be curving like this too. So not much of a curve, right? And then, as we already talked about, get rid of that. Our arm post is going to come up something like this. Let's see. Let's see, is that right? Yeah. And then we have the block over the leg like this. So this is what we're thinking to start with, okay? A little nicer, right? It's got a little more pleasing. it's got soft curves, so it feels appropriate still to the chair. It's classing it up a little bit, right? It's making it feel a little more set apart, but still belonging. So that's where we're going to head. And let's just take a short break. And after that, I'm going to show you the drawing and we'll knock one out real fast and see how it looks. All right, let's take a break. All right, so here we go. You want to work with full-size drawings because you've got to make these templates to begin with, as Claude said, and it just helps so much in figuring out the angles of the joinery, how long the pieces have to be with your tenons before you start and all that. So that's one of the things that we try to emphasize with our courses is that every course has a full-size drawing associated with it. In fact, some people just get the drawing. And if you feel like you don't need the video course, then by all means, but it's very typical for if you're making furniture gets more complex than your basic rectangular furniture to draw it in full size because you get to solve a lot of issues on paper with an eraser rather than throwing wood in the fire, right? So that's the case as well with chairs. So we go right from our scale drawing to blowing it up to full size. Here's our side view of the side chair. So this is the actual one of the pages for this side chair that we showed initially. All the joinery is shown here. And you've got the side view, the splat, the little angles, and the shoe. But when building a chair, we won't get deep into this right now, but you can simplify it by just thinking of it from 3 views. Okay, you have the side view, or if it's a house, it'd be like an elevation, right? Drawing. So you have all the elevations here, and it gives you the all-important back leg shape, and you can make the patterns just like this, right from the drawing. Like I just perforate through the drawing, stipple through, and then recreate and draw your joinery right on there from the drawing. Then you have this pattern. And you'll end up making several patterns for the pieces, maybe for the curved crest rail. If it was a Queen Anne chair, you'll be making the Queen Anne leg. And you end up with a bundle of patterns at the end that you can tie together and then hang them on your wall. Like this is just a fraction of, and it's kind of a memory and it's almost like a trophy, like to that thing, right? You're like, I did it. I did it. You hang them on your wall, and and it's a good memory. But yeah, Pug had a wall that was like a foot deep, like I don't know, at least like this. It's just crazy. And I got a bunch of those patterns, but have them in storage still. But here we've got this is our back leg, and then we would get our front joinery off of this piece as well. So we have our side view. Get our side pattern, then our plan view or the top view, and this is so helpful in getting those angles for the seat rails, right? And then we have the front view, which you can see right on this side of the page. So this is that splat, and you're seeing all the joinery coming up through, seeing the tenon coming in through here, and then the crest rail top view. Now this is the augmented or drawing because this is the fresh off the presses. This is the bonus content drawing where we added, you can see I've added the crest rail for the armchair. It's just a little longer so we could show that different curve. But the real important thing is on this view, if you're looking down here, this is the profile of our arm that we just looked at. Okay, so you can see the dotted line represents the arm post with that curve. This is the back leg here, and here's our arm coming across. We needed a thicker block to get that dotted line curve that we decided on at the end there, right? So that's what we're going for. So we have our profile here, then we have our front view, where you're looking straight on to the arm post. And one of the things I'll mention in a little bit is we decided to add a soft taper to that arm post because it looked a little heavy after the mock-up was made. It needed to have the taper similar to the back leg, feel like it belonged, right? And then we've got a 1 inch, I went to a 1 inch thick arm. That seemed like enough. And then we have to have a plan view, as you mentioned earlier, where we have to start out with a block wide enough to give us, this is going to be our arm shape, okay? So this is our back leg. We are going to sweep out and come up forward. And here's our through tenon. We've got our through mortise. I decided on a 3/4 inch mortise, so it was large enough to be a strong and also a nice visual detail, right? So there we go. I'm not going to go into all the details of building this, except to say that you've got to start, once you've decided on your shapes for your arms and locations and things, a large enough block to contain those curves, right? So once I've got my drawing here, I've actually drawn within those parameters for this arm post here. It's 3.5 inches wide, and I need 9.5, it's on the drawing here, from the top of the arm to the top of the seat rail. That's what we went with. And then our arm is 1 inch thick. So to this shoulder of our arm post, we're going to be 8.5 inches to the seat rail from the notch over the seat rail. We've got a little notch right here. Up to the underside of the arm is 8.5 plus our inch with the arm. And then we're sweeping back here. Now to get that side profile curve of the arm, I needed a thicker block. So we went with 1 7/8. So you can get that out of 1/4 stock. Your 1 7/8. And we're going to make a pattern that gives us that profile. For thickness of the arm post, looking at the front view, I started with 1 3/8 wide. Then I ended up notching over about 5/16 or so. And then that's going to get tapered down. Initially, we'll have a quarter inch shoulder on one side. And we've got a 3/8 on this side. So we're kicking it out a little. See, I don't know if you can pick it up here, but this post, this arm's sweeping out. So it's justified off the outside of that 3.25. This block for the arm is 3.25 wide. Okay. So let's just fast forward to making the pattern. So now I've got a plywood pattern. I could make this right on the piece of plywood. And then I could make, this is the arm detail. I don't know if you can see this, but I just have a square noted here. I should have done that in ink so you could see it, but so I'm locating my through mortise and my notch around the leg. So let me show you one other drawing. Let me show you on this one first. This is the initial side view of the armchair. This is easier to see it, right? We've got these are the full-size proportions of the armchair. So our seat is just 17 inches deep instead. And there's our same arm post before I made the final drawing. This is how working drawings tend to look in the shop. So I wouldn't have it all filled out with the detail, but that's how we do it. And you end up spilling coffee on there and tearing it. And by the time you're done, you're like, well, I made a mess of that. Should I even save it? But this is the plan view of the seat rail. And so you can see I was drawing right here. I'm just taking the same width, and now we're flipping it so we're looking down on it right here. So you can see this is the outline of the arm post initially. And then after I saw this curve back, I'm going to end up with this dotted line block right up here. So that's all this is just to locate where I'm going to put that mortise through that arm. So we locate all of that before, drill the mortise, and then all the curves are cut, okay? So we got to do this planning, and this is where the geometrics of it get a little complicated, but especially, I won't get too far into this, but where that notch goes around the leg, it's not right at the seat rail. We've got, we're coming in 9.5 or so inches back here, right? Or 9.5. And so this leg is reclining back now. Okay? This leg is reclining back, so our notch has to be set further back. So you can draw all this in the 3 dimensions back here. So here's my drawing. I'm looking down on the drawing. See, here's it leaning back. And I drew this right straight above. So this square is where the seat rail meets the back leg. And we turn it so we're looking down on it. This square is kind of aligned right here, okay? So then I just draw parallel lines right up from this point where I can see the arm is joining in. This is the actual leg, okay? So that's showing me exactly how far that leg has reclined back, right? From that 90-degree joint there. So I can then locate that up here. See, it's gotten smaller too because it's tapering, right? So it's a little mind-bending at first, but you just by drawing it in relationship like this, you can figure out all that. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it would be really hard to cut that after you saw the curve, right? So all that we want to get cut before we cut this curve in. So that's the order, is to mark out our joinery on our block, arm block, then cut our joinery, then we do this profile cut, so we have this wide kind of flat slab of an arm that's curving, and then we cut our plan view curve, which ends up, this is the template from the other side. So we're going to end up with an arm that sweeps out more like that, okay? Right inside. That's what we ended up with, okay? So that is drawn on the original drawing. So
The profile looks to almost match the crest rail too.
yeah, it's similar curves, right? It's not super strong. But when I did the initial mock-up, I had it wider. And it's weird how you look at it and you go, something's not right. It looked just too wide for it. So I ended up going with a 2-inch wide. It ended up being a little less than that, but it feels right. You'll see in a few minutes. So there we go. We just got to locate this. And once on the drawing, once I had this drawn out, I just drew this line. So I'm starting with this right here. This is the top of my initial arm block. That's 1 7/8 inches thick. This is the top, right where it hits that back leg reclining. I just squared straight up from that to this front edge and straight up from this point here. So this square is the location of my notch at the top of the arm block. You see, that matters because I have to draw angled lines down from that for my notch. I'm going to have a notch, but I can't just cut that 90 degrees into my arm block. So my reference point for this square is off the top of the arm block, okay? And once you break it down like this, it's like, oh, okay, what could go wrong? Everyone always laughs when you say that, but because we know. We find a way, right? So anyway, it ended up being that once I laid this out and I checked it twice, I measured from that point, that corner, to the to the square of my through mortise is 12 3/4 of an inch. So now I could start thinking about laying this all out. So I've got, this is the exact same template drawn on a square, on a rectangular piece. And then I just needed, this is the stock. So it's 1 7/8. This is going to get an arm. This will get me my I started with like 18 3/8 long. I've got my 3 1/4 width to accommodate the sweeping curve of that arm. So doing it a little more detailed, we end up with the finished drawing, which we end up with this. So now all the notations are here of the dimensions, and there's the 12 3/4 that we figured out from that. And then the distance of that mortise is 1.5 inches off the inside edge and all that. So initially, what I did was lay this out and cut the mortise. But before we move to that, I just want to show you how these patterns got refined. So over the top of this is the initial square. It has that through mortise located there. Then I created the dotted line on there and cut it out. So it ends up that through mortise is slightly angled to this arm, which is fine, but it's aligned. That tenon and through mortise is actually at the same angle as the side rail, okay? Because it attaches. See how that block is? It's right on there. But that's all you're concerned about. This curve gets cut last. This is the last thing we saw. But all the joinery's done, so there's no worries. And people will look at it later and go, wow, how did you ever figure that out? Well, everything, that's one of the secrets of some of these real complex joints, is they're all referenced off of square parts first. So here's my other template I showed you earlier, and then I just sawed it out. So now I have my pattern for the actual shape. This would be my pattern. And lastly, I needed this profile pattern. So here's my 1 7/8 block. That's going to slope down like that dotted line. And I've got the location for my through tenon, and that'll give me my profile. So I only need it on one side because I'll saw this and clean it up, and then I'll use that curve against the fence to saw the parallel underside curve, okay? Now, this has a little secret flat area right here, because right where that joint enters, we want a slight flat. It's hard to see it, right? Because it's such a smooth kind of curve. But that'll give us a parallel saw cut. And it's just a small shoulder for this arm post anyway, so it's pretty forgiving. But that's what we're going to use to help us there. All right, so let's just go really fast here. All right, we're going to make an arm in 40 minutes. All right, so I already cut the mortise. That helps. No, I knew we weren't going to have time for that. But this is actually just locating on this block 1.5 inches from this side. And then I came back 3 1/4 from the front. And you're going to locate that. Now, you could do that by hand, with squares. So, but I almost never use these things, but they came in really handy, these little setup blocks, right? Or something you have, if you just have a piece of wood that's exactly, whatever, 3/4, it doesn't even have to be exactly 3/4. It's just whatever it is. I just used it I've got good, true square stock, right? I'm starting good and true and square. So I'm able to just set my combination square to like 3 1/4, lock it in. And then I would take my knife and I would come here and I would just knife across from my front joint here, just like that. Then I bring in this setup block. This is before the mortise is cut, okay? And I would just knife that direction. Then I'm going to change it to my 1.5 inches. that we know from our drawing, we're going to come off the inside 1.5 inches, and we would knife this, and then I would knife that. So now I've got a very accurate location of the top of that mortise. Then I can flip it upside down, use the same. I'm going to knife the underside at the same time before I move the square, right? So I knife that, and then I would have knifed the front. So I end up knowing that as long as I'm good and true and square, those knife lines are referencing dead perpendicular to each other. And if I could just chop right to those knife lines, what could go wrong? So I am going, what I ended up doing was, you can do it that way. I have done a few where I just go to the drill press and cut it with a 5/8 Forstner bit or whatever from both sides. And then you can just chisel straight to the knife line. And you'd be amazed how accurate that actually can get you because of the way you laid it out accurately. But for the course, I wanted to try something different. I thought, let's see if we can do it on the hollow chisel mortiser as an option, not so time consuming. And it really doesn't matter that much. It's hard to tell whether you cut a hole by hand or not, right? So I didn't have a 3/4 inch chisel. In fact, they go for a little over $100 for a 3/4 inch chisel. And I almost never need them. So I was like, this is probably what most people are going to feel like, right? Why am I going to buy a 3/4 inch chisel just for this? Well, you can actually modify, and I show this in the course, using a 3/8 or another, right? I took my 3/8 chisel and put a stop on my table, my hollow chisel mortising table. And all I needed was a 3/8 spacer to push me off the fence. So now, and then I do one cut with the spacer, one without, and then my block goes all the way to the back of the fence. And now I got a 3-inch hole this direction. And then I had the same thickness spacer off the stop. I do one with, one without. I end up with 4 cuts, and you'd be surprised how accurate that is. And that's how I did that. That's 4 plunges going nice and easy. And the nice thing is, because we know we're sawing away here, we don't have to go all the way through. I didn't go all the way through. I went about a 1/2 inch from the table because I know I'm sawing that way. Okay. So let me just mark this out. Usually these would be here first, but these I actually didn't even need to mark because I was able to set up stops over at the... Okay. So now, here's my arm. I know this is going to be my curvature, so I'm going to align my template where my location is there, and I'll go flush with the bottom. And I can just draw right on top. Let me get a pen here. Okay. All right. There's our profile. That'll be our saw cut. And from the top, I won't do that till after I cut that. But what I have to locate here is that notch. Remember that? Yeah. So this is going to be the left arm this way. So I want my notch down here. So all I have to do is find that 12 3/4 from the mortise. I'll just come out here. I'll make this quick. That's the corner of that mortise. And I know it's just shy of 1.5 inches. Yeah. This is one of the few times on my drawings I put a 30-second mark. I try to stay with the 16ths, but I measured this every which way, and it just was right in the middle of 1 7/16 and 1.5. So I said 1 in 15, 30 seconds. I often get comments on YouTube from people in Europe, and they go, "Why are you on the imperial system? What's your problem?" I go, "I don't know. I just responded to someone the other day who said that. Why you guys, why don't you go to the metric? You're the only one of the only few countries." He went on and on. I go, you know,
Because we like to punish ourselves.
I know. I said, I remember in grade school,
Yeah, they talked about that.
there was a good effort, right? They said, "Oh, we're going over," and everything tried to go over. And that's what I said. I said, I think they tried to do it. And I said, in the end, it didn't take. I think we got about 5/16 of the way. That's all. I haven't heard back. All right, so with chair making, once you've gotten to the arms, you're kind of getting more comfortable with applying angles and using a bevel gauge if you haven't used one before. But this is the seat angle. So that angle from, if I was to lay this kind of on the back here, this would be the angle of that seat rail, okay? The way it's coming off the back. So it's basically a rise of 2 inches, right? We're going 2 inches out that side, 2 inches out this side, because it's 4 inches wider in the front. So it's a rise of 2 inches over a run of 17. And that's this angle. A 1 8.5 angle on your dovetail gauge, right?
It's the arctangent of 2/17.
The what?
It's the arctangent.
The arctangent of 2/17. Wow. Yeah. Now you're getting. I know. You lost me on that arctangent. I did know those at one time. All right. So now once we establish that, I lock this in, I set it up. I'm going to use that. I need that to draw my notch around at that specific point. So I'll just do that right here. And then I'm going to just come around. Wait, am I doing this the right way? No, I'm not. So this is why whenever I do chairs like this, I like to hold it like this. All right, this is the left arm. So it's going to be this way, right? So you just make kind of like just an orientation mark, right? So I got my point right there. So now I can do this right. I did that on purpose, actually, just to show you what can go wrong. Okay, and then we'll go over this way. Okay, so that's it. That's our notch around the leg. We know right where it is because we had our reference off our drawing. Now, when we get to the side view, this line is not 90 degrees because the leg is reclining at that space. We know it's reclining at that rough angle, right? So I have another gauge that I set up using a square and just set it up so it would represent the recline angle here. So I could just bring that over and transfer it onto my block. Okay, so this is coming away. Now I can just transfer those lines underneath so I know they have to go again like that. So here's my seat angle again. I'll just set it. I know. That is a problem sometimes. I'll just go over there and then I'll come back over this way. Now I haven't got this one yet. So here is the notch. Now this is where this chair gets a little more complicated. I would just cut it 90 degrees, right? Shouldn't it go in there? Well, actually, if you built these chairs, you know that you can see that it starts wider down here. It's 1 5/8 inches, and it gets to be 1 inch square up here, right? So it's tapering from 1 5/8 inches to 1 inch, and that taper happens on the outside. that means that notch has to have that soft little taper in it. But you can easily figure that out too, right? You're just going to go over a run. I think it's 22 inches. Over 22 inches, you have a 5/8 rise. Okay, so over 11, it's 5/16. Give me that arc thing again. So I can get totally confused. I don't know. So anyway, this back line, so at the top, I'm narrower, so it's, whoops, see that's kind of slightly out that way. See that? Did I draw it? Yeah, so it's slightly out that way. And I actually have a little bevel gauge that's already set to that. So I want to make sure I get it in the right orientation. And then I can bring this in. And I can draw that accurately. This is the line. And now I can just add that last seat angle line to the underneath. So I'll just get that on there. And okay. So once you've got all your lines there, all you have to do is cut to those lines. So actually, you could handsaw this, but you're going to have more fussing and fitting later. You could do it. I have done it, but if you could actually cut this on a bandsaw if you set up your table right. But in the video, I show how to quickly make wedges using your rises and runs. You just lay it out on like a piece of MDF or a thicker piece of wood. Just lay out the rise and the run and then bandsaw that and then use that wedge on the table saw to make your cross cuts, okay? So you're tilting your blade to your seat angle. It's hard to explain here, but you're tilting your blade to your seat angle and then you're affecting the other angle vertically, okay? So like this, and you got this. I know it seems like a lot, but believe it or not, it's surprisingly accurate. When you go to fit it up, it almost lands dead on.
It's only as accurate as you can cut those wedges.
Yeah. No, but it's really forgiving because those are long kind of bevels and you're bandsawing to a line and then I just zing it over the joiner. If you want to make the chair, you'll see it. There's no smoke and mirrors and it actually comes out pretty accurately. Yeah. So, so let's just, I'm not going to bother with this right now because it's too complex to get into. I want to just try to focus on this joint first. So let's get our side block. This is just a piece of rough pine here, but this is the dimension from our drawing. So we got our 1 3/8 thickness, our 3.5 inch width, and it's about 12.5 inches long. So this will be I ended up designated this as the left side from so our curve is going to be something like that, right? So we know we're going to have our leg block down here. So that means when laying this out, I'm just going to put my template on here and let me get some of this stuff out of the way. I'll get flush on the back here. I'll get flush to the front. And let's draw that. Oh, yeah, I'll use a pen. Okay. So there's our angle. And we're going to leave a 1.5 inch tenon length up at the top. I'm sorry, 1 1/4. So that we'll go up through the inch thick and then we'll have extra to make our pyramid. The pyramid ends up being only an 1/8 inch high or so, but that's what we'll go with. All right, so before we cut that shape, you need to cut the joinery. You're going to have a tenon up here that's just our 3/4 inch square. It's offset so that on the outside, the tenon is closer to the outside, so we get that pushing out from the seat a little bit, you know, so we're going to have a little more distance on this side. So we're going to be a 1/4 inch from the outside and a 1/4 inch off the back. You'll know that if you're going to make this, but that's just for this. And then it's going to notch over the seat rail, just something like this, right? So we'll have, that will be notched right there. That's going to come out over our seat rail. And of course you have the mirror image of the other side. So let me just bang this out. I'm going to just show you on the table saw. You'll have to watch this on the video, but I'll just do this quick tenon cut over here. I'm using a spacer jig, okay? This is just for cutting tenons where we've got our 3/4 inch thick plus the saw curve for the second cut. And it should get us a 3/4. All right. So what I'm going to do is with that, I've got it set already. So it's going to cut a 1/4 inch off the side when I have the block in there. Then I'll take the block out and it's going to slide over and give me my 3/4. And I raise the blade up just shy of 1.25 inches for the length. And I'm just going to cut the shoulders over there after. But anyway, that's what we're going to do here. And then I'll turn it so the face is against the fence and I get a 1/4 inch off that side. So here we go. Okay. So we can kind of see where we are here. So now I want to notch or cut the shoulder of all this. So I'm just going to do it on the bandsaw. I did it on the table saw in the video. I got the bandsaw is set at 1.25 inches. Now it's starting to smell like a shop, right?
Yeah.
All right. This is my little crosscut sled for the bandsaw. It's a 90-degree angle. I rarely use it, but this was actually used over at the Shaker Village in the late 90s when I first started teaching classes over there. So I'm going to just use this to index with the tenon off the fence. So this is hooked up to the dust collector, so I will hit this. Oh. Okay. Of course, I would cut this notch as well. I won't go to the trouble of doing that. But then I just need to clean up around this tenon. I didn't go quite as deep. And hopefully this is going to fit. We'll see, right? I'm gonna do this little slick change out. Whoops! Oh, what do you know? It's already pyramided. No. Boy, you guys would be hard to fool with my magic trick.
Because we've done them all.
All right. That's pretty good. Now, here's the thing. This is the top of the joint. So this is one little tip in fitting through tenons, right? Through mortise and tenons where you're going to see it exposed there. I would fit, this is the top. This is the exposed surface. And this is going to stick about 1/4 inch high. So about 1/4 inch down from there is the actual fit of this. So I would fit it first from the outside, right? Not up through there, because you might end up working it, and by the time you get here, it's loose, right? Because you might, no, you can't. No, I know, but I mean, I could fit this later, but you're right.
Could break a piece of the top coming through too, take a chunk off, you know what I mean, through the top of the hole. You know what I mean? Yeah, you come up with-
Yeah, right. Yeah, you could. Yeah, that has happened, right? So I'm just going to press this, and I can see that it's fitting pretty good, pretty snug. So I ain't lying. I didn't do that with my mouth. That was another little deception. You missed that, didn't you? I know. So there we go. We've got that fit. Now we can cut out the bottom, and we know we should be pretty darn close. So I'm going to go over to the bandsaw, and this is going to take a little bit longer of a cut, but we'll go ahead and clean that up. I'll cut this shape out, imagining we've already notched that. Okay, that notch would have been done. So we just want to get to the process here, a little bit of shaping. So there we've got our sawn. See that flat right there? We've got that. But I've got a little bit of a bumpiness there, so let's just quickly clean that up so we don't repeat that on the underside. And I'm just going to hit this with a block plane. I'm just feeling for high spots. So I can feel like right here. So using a block plane, keeping the nose down, you can actually skim and take off all the high spots on a soft little curve like this. Okay, I don't want to fuss with it too much. Then it actually curves down a little bit in the front. Okay. So there, we've got that curve fared a little bit. Now we can set our fence to 1 inch and just keep that curved surface against the fence right ahead of the blade, okay? I'm just going to keep my finger pressure right ahead of the blade as we go through. And then keeping it flat while we go through there. Just set my fence to 1 inch. Not. All right, so there's our left arm. Hopefully we'll be able to fit this now. Up through. Get a little snug. Let me just give it a little skim in there. See, I'm skimming it slightly because when you use that method where you use the spacer with the hollow chisel, it wants to drift to where it's. But if you go slow, it's very little. It might need a little skim like that. But I'm making sure I don't touch that exit hole, right? Just to skim it. And now I should get. That's pretty snug, but it's through. Okay? Doesn't even need glue. All right, so now we've got our arm. This would be notched normally, but the last thing we need to do is to cut that shape. You know, you could leave it like that and have the old Morris chair look, right? But we'll give it a little more refinement. We've got our template. And this is why, like I cut that out so that it would make it easier to set it up, you know, and then back here, I'd set this right to the line. Well, that would already be notched out. So all the joinery is cut and you're just doing the shaping now. So there's our shape. Now we'll just knock this out. All right. There it is. So this would be laying over. I'd be notched out around there. But look at that. Look at how the arm is right here. See how that's kind of heavy? It looks, you're looking at it in relation to the front leg, but also back here. It's pretty light. Got to thinking, it'd be nice if it tapered instead of being 1 3/8 here. I tried it at 1 inch at the top, and it felt a little too skinny, too sharp of a taper. So I went just a little more than that, 1/16, 1 1/8, something like that. So let me show you a couple of the earlier versions. We had, when I first thought about using the straight arm, here's the straight arm. So that notches over.
Yeah, it's missing something.
Once you've seen the curve, you can't unsee it. Right? Look at that. It could work though, right? It's not awful, but look how straight. Not a lot. Then I played around with refining it a little more, and this was the first curve. Okay? So you have a better look from the side. And this is where it started playing around with how wide it should be. So you can shade it in with pencil, or a lot of times I'll use black electrical tape and just put the black tape down on some guidelines, and it makes it look like it's sawn away, right? While you're working out what you want to do, right? And then this is all really relaxed because it's just pine, and you can knock these out fast. And then once I had it closer, I went to another model of this, and now I put a taper here on the front. Now we have the actual arm shape. We're notched around the leg the way we want. And I thought it looked a little chunky in the front, so I thought a little undercut facet. And we've got facets on here already, so that felt okay. And then this one shows probably the furthest development of the arm, where we've got the facet and the pyramid details now showing up. So the last thing, and this is why I thought I might be able to show you a finished chair, but we have our last evening of this course on Tuesday night. So I'll be gluing up this arm, and we'll be attaching it the way we talked about, notching it. We're going to let it into the leg just by like a 1/16 of an inch or so. But you can see this is almost right off the saw, like how nice a fit it is back there, using those lines that we just did. And then okay. We got a few drafts right here, right? We got the rough draft, the middle, and this is almost ready for print right here, right? So this is the final. So now this has the taper in the front. I'm so tempted to like put soft little radiuses on there. You can't though, because nothing else is, right? But I could nicely break the edges so they felt right. Same on the arm. It comes around. We've got that nice curve this way. I was tempted to dish this out a little on the top to have that slope in, but when I did that, it was weird because it looked weird because you lost the curve. And actually comfort-wise, it's pretty comfortable just like it is here. So, and then this one, of course, you're going to I just take a very fine pencil and mark around and cut that to an 1/8 inch long, and then lay out and make the pyramid detail in the same way we did up here. And you do all that before you glue it up, obviously. So this is 2-stage glue up. We just would get glue in there, get it on there, and then I would actually clamp it to the seat, right? And make sure it's sitting there. And then I can run a clamp down, off of the rail, off the bottom of the post here, and just get creative. So you just get a clamp pressure on both sides, and you're landing right, and let it dry like that. And then you're ready to go.
No treatment to the bottom?
I just get it flush to the bottom. I'm not rounding it or anything like that. But there is one little extra thing that I didn't get into. When I cut this notch, I left it a 1/16 inch proud of the actual line. I gave myself a little extra. So I'm going to let it in a 1/16. Okay. Could have done an 1/8. I just thought I'll just do a 1/16. So this is a 1/16 inch piece of veneer. I'll put that on the block if I want to be real precise, have that there. And then when I set this back in here, that's the actual fit right there. Because once I route in there, I'm going to be moving this way a 1/16. So I'll take out my spacer. Now it's going to move over, right? Now it'll be let in. And once I get that figured out and let in, then I'll knife around the front, because this front arm does not come all the way across. I'll knife around, and then I'll route that to about a 1/16 inch deep, chop it nicely, and you'll get the final full fit. Trim the back, let in your plug, run the screw and glue it up, screw and glue here, and plug it, and that's it. Easy. I mean, look how, you see how long this is a pretty fast arm, but it's pretty sweet. I feel like let's get it on there. We can get a final look at it. I can actually, I think I've got a, okay, so now you can see how this is going to look. All right, there's our armchair version. So like any chair, you don't really know what it is till you sit in it. So I'm just gonna, this is a half-ass job. Sorry. No. So I always wanted to say that. No. Now this was made by my upholsterer, and he just did it like that, obviously, to show you the stages. Yes. So I'm just going to set it in here. I won't get the full effect of what it's like to sit in there. I think that's pretty sturdy. Famous last words. But then you're always going to check it out. Feels good. Good height. I mean, it doesn't really need to be dished in. I'll leave this over here if anybody wants to dare sit in it. But, the other thing I debated was, should I leave those arms that long? It seemed it's longer than typical. But, it's less of that little Tyrannosaurus Rex arm, that you'd have back here. And it actually, Morris chairs, those arms are pretty abundant, usually in width. So why not leave it a little long? I had Chris in it. I was playing around, fussing with, should I go 3, 2 5/8? And then I just decided to leave it. You can always cut it shorter, but you can check that out and see if you like it. I'm going to set it over here. All right, everyone. That's it for me. Thank you very much.